Before dawn, Whitechapel already looked guilty. Fog crawled through London's poorest streets. Gas lamps trembled over wet stones. Doors stayed locked, voices stayed low, and somewhere in that darkness, he waited. They called him Jack the Ripper, but that name came later. At first he was fear, a shadow crossing Victorian London. No face, no arrest, no confession. Only bodies, letters, rumors, panic. It is a city failing its poorest. In 1888, Whitechapel was overcrowded. Families squeezed into broken lodging houses. Workers slept beside strangers for pennies. Women walked streets to survive hunger. The rich called the district dangerous, but danger hunted the desperate. Police knew the alleys were tense. On August 34, 1888, horror arrived. Mary Ann Nichols was found dead. Her body lay in Buck's Row. The attack was sudden and silent. Whitechapel woke to whispers and footsteps. Police searched, questioned, and guessed, but the killer had vanished. 8 days later, terror returned. Annie Chapman was found in Hanbury Street. Again, the attack was close. Again, the killer escaped unseen. Now Whitechapel knew something was wrong. This was not ordinary street violence. This was a pattern taking shape. A murderer was reading the streets. He understood darkness, noise, and poverty. He knew when witnesses looked away, and struck where life was cheapest. The newspapers smelled blood and profit. Headlines turned fear into business. Every edition fed the nightmare. Suspect names spread like disease. Men were followed, threatened, accused. One false name was Leather Apron. It spread through London like smoke. Immigrant communities faced suspicion and anger. Fear wanted an easy target. But the real killer stayed hidden. Then came September 30. Whitechapel suffered the double event. Elizabeth Stride was found in Dutefield's yard. Some believe the killer was interrupted. Less than an hour later, Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square. 2 women, 2 locations, 1 shaking city. Police lines formed under gaslight. Doctors examined limited evidence. Detectives followed footprints and statements. But modern forensics did not exist. No CCTV watched the streets. No DNA database could speak. Fingerprints were not routine. The killer was protected by time, by darkness, confusion, and panic. Then the story gained a signature. A letter reached the Central News Agency. It was dated September 25, 1888. It mocked police and promised violence. It was signed, Jack the Ripper. That signature changed everything. Maybe the writer was the killer. Maybe it was a hoax. Many historians doubt the letter today, but newspapers printed the name. After that, letters flooded Scotland Yard. Some were childish, some cruel. Most were almost certainly fake, but each one deepened terror. The killer no longer needed proof. The media gave him immortality. Whitechapel residents formed vigilance patrols. Men searched alleys with lamps. Windows opened at every scream. Every stranger became a suspect, and every woman carried fear. Police were blamed from every direction. The public demanded arrests. Reporters demanded stories, not truth. Detectives drowned in tips and lies. The investigation became a storm. Inside it, poverty stayed invisible. The victims became symbols, not people, but they had names and lives. Mary Ann Nichols had survived hardship. Annie Chapman knew sickness and loss. Elizabeth Stride searched for stability. Catherine Eddowes had family and humor. Mary Jane Kelly was young. These women were not evidence. They were human beings failed twice. First by society, then history. On November 9, 1888, the nightmare entered a small room. Mary Jane Kelly was found dead. Her murder was the most horrific. Even hardened officials were shaken. After Kelly, the pattern seemed to stop. No capture followed. No trial began. No final answer arrived. The killer disappeared into London, and silence became part of the crime. That silence created endless suspects. Doctors, butchers, sailors, artists, royals. Every generation built its theory. Aaron Kosminski became one famous suspect. Montague Druitt became another debated name. Francis Tumblety was also questioned. Others sound ridiculous, but none closed the case. The truth stayed behind locked doors. Evidence had been lost. Witnesses saw fragments, not certainty. Newspapers polluted public memory, and Victorian policing was limited. Whitechapel was a hard battlefield. It was crowded, dark, exhausted. People came and went constantly. Lodging houses swallowed identities nightly. A killer could become any man. He could pass as a worker. He could vanish into market crowds. He could hide in ordinary clothes. That is what makes him terrifying. Not horns or supernatural evil, but the possibility of normality. A murderer who looked forgettable. A predator protected by a broken city. Today, Jack the Ripper is everywhere, but obsession often misses something. The mystery became louder than victims. The killer became famous. They became footnotes. That is the ugliest part. Whitechapel did not need legend. It needed safety, dignity, justice. Instead, it received headlines and fear. The police files remained incomplete. The letters remained suspicious and theatrical, and the streets kept secrets. More than a century later, people ask the same question. Who was Jack the Ripper? But maybe another question matters more. Why were these women so unprotected? Why did suffering become entertainment? Why did panic outsell truth? Victorian London feared the monster outside, but the monster exposed the city, its poverty, prejudice, and indifference. That is why the case survives, not only because he was unknown, but because the failure was public. Whitechapel became London's mirror, and London hated the reflection. The killer escaped the gallows. He escaped the courtroom. He escaped the newspapers that named him. But he never escaped history. Jack the Ripper remains uncaught, not because he was brilliant, but because his world was broken. And in that broken world, 5 women paid the final price. The fog lifted from Whitechapel. The old streets changed. But the question still waits, in silence, under the gaslight. Who killed them? And why did nobody save them?